your paper should be completed in time, whatever the time slot is given to you, and your paper will be assessed on the following points. The first is the title, second is the content of your paper, third is the originality or innovative what you are going to present. Then how is your presentation in terms of slides, how you are prepared. Nextly, your art of presentation, how you speak, how your fluency of speaking or presentation, that will be assessed. And lastly, what is its application of your paper. All these things will be considered, and accordingly you will give marks, and you will be able to select which is a good paper or the best paper. So I think now we should start with the presentation, and I call upon the first presenter to present his paper.
From RMC Loni, who is a JR3 resident in Department of Orthopedics.
Good evening, myself Dr. Swapnil Mahajan, presenting you on a topic of outcomes of conservative versus operative management in a fracture shaft tibia and fracture shaft femur in pediatric age group. Contains our title, introduction, given objective, material methods, discussion and result. So fractures of tibia are relatively common. Fractures are commonly associated with soft tissue injury, and fractures are not only injury to the bone but also to the soft tissue. During treatment, soft tissue handling decides the outcome of the healing. Tibia fractures are associated with wide range of injury mechanisms and severities. The management of the tibia fractures are influenced greatly by associated soft tissue injury. Tibia is more often involved in open fractures because of its subcutaneous location. Severe open fractures of tibia are associated with high complication rate and poor long-term outcomes. 70% of pediatric tibial fractures are isolated injuries, and approximately 30% of pediatric shaft tibia fractures are associated with fibular fracture. So, mechanism of injury for tibia in adolescents is direct blow or vehicular accident, while in toddlers, low energy, twisting or fall are most common causes. The most common cause for low energy tibia fracture are sports injuries, while of high energy fractures are associated with vehicle trauma. Most common pattern of fracture in tibia in children is spiral pattern due to torsional injuries. Incidence of the femur fracture varies from 1% to 9% of all fractures, and often is a major source of morbidity and mortality. These fractures are mainly because of high energy trauma in younger males, like road traffic accidents, fall from height. So fracture pattern in femur fracture is based on direction and force applied to the bone. The bone feels under the tensile strain. Bending force create transverse pattern fracture and also may create butterfly fragment on compression side. Rotational force create either spiral or oblique fracture pattern. Fracture of shaft femur is common in boys and occur in bimodal distribution with peak during toddler years, usually because of simple falls and then again in early adolescence. The main purpose of the treatment is to maintain or restore the length, deformity correction, achieving adequate stability, early mobilization. Spiral or oblique fracture, if not treated properly, has a high chance of going in malunion. In literature, it has been mentioned that the rate of success of cast treatment of pediatric shaft tibia fracture ranges from 60 to 90%. In this study, same type of fractures are compared, that is transverse, oblique and spiral. The aim of this study is to clinical radiological outcome of patients with tibial and femoral fracture who are treated with close reduction and internal fixation with nailing versus treated conservatively by casting. So 40 cases with femur or tibia fracture treated with nailing and conservatively between 1st January 2022 to 30th November 2022 at Rural Medical College, Loni, a rural tertiary hospital, were analyzed retrospectively. Out of which 16 patients treated conservatively and 4 patients underwent operative management for tibia fracture, while 16 patients were treated operatively and 4 patients treated conservatively for femur fractures. So inclusion criteria for a patient of age more than 9 years to 20 years with tibial shaft and femoral fracture. Patient willing to give consent and undergo close reduction and internal fixation with elastic nailing for fracture management and fresh fracture. Exclusion criteria are medically unfit patient, patient not giving consent, pathological fractures, and loss to follow-up. On admission, brief history was elicited to document mechanism of injury. Clinical examination followed by hematological, other routine lab investigation were done. For all patients, radiological investigation include X-ray, anterior-posterior view, and lateral view of affected site. Written and informed consent was taken for all patients. So these are the graphs for which are operated and operative for and conservative for femur and tibia. So this is the X-ray for fracture shaft femur for pediatric age group, which was conserved, and 1 week follow-up X-ray was done. Similarly, fracture shaft tibia or a pediatric age group, which is again applied casting, and 1 week follow-up X-ray was done. And this is the pediatric age group fracture shaft femur, which was taken for elastic nailing. This is a fracture shaft tibia, pediatric age group again, which is taken for elastic nailing. The discussion we have, the tibia is the second largest bone in the body. The shaft of tibia is the shape of prism with broad proximal extent that decreases in size till distal third.
So 5 minutes are done. The floor is now open for discussion for 2 minutes.
Tibial pressure is prominent intermediately from tibial tubercle to the tibial plafond and is subcutaneous without overlying musculature. The fibular fracture may complete or incomplete with some plastic deformity. Shaft tibia fracture associated with fracture of fibula often tend towards varus angulation due to action of the muscle in anterolateral aspect of leg. If fibula is not fractured, conservative management fails in most of the cases because the height is maintained with intact fibula. No micromotion occurs at the fracture site. Few patients of the shaft tibia fractures were managed on OPD basis by fiber cast application and were allowed to wait there on the principle of functional cast dressing. As per Wolff's law, bone in a healthy animal will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. If loading on a particular bone increases, the bone will remodel itself over time and become stronger to resist that sort of load.
Time is over now. We have 2 minutes for question and answer.
Any questions from audience? Okay, next.
Now I call upon Dr. Mehak Galani, who is a junior assistant.
We'll ring a bell when the 5 minutes are up. After that, only question answer round for 2 minutes.
A very good afternoon to one and all. My topic for paper presentation is evaluation of multi-detector computed tomography pulmonary angiography findings in suspected cases of pulmonary thromboembolism. I have done the study under the guidance of Dr. Yogendra Sachdev, Professor and Head of Department, Pravra Rural Medical College, Loni. What exactly is pulmonary embolism? It is the partial or total occlusion of one or more central or peripheral pulmonary arteries by thrombi that originate typically in the large veins of the lower extremities or pelvis. CTPA is the current gold standard in suspected cases of pulmonary thromboembolism. The aim of my paper is to assess the evaluation of multi-detected computed tomography pulmonary angiography findings in suspected cases of pulmonary thromboembolism referred to the Department of Radiodiagnosis at Pravra Rural Hospital, Loni. The objective was to study the radiographic findings in these patients with common clinical presentation and to study the proportion, age and gender distribution. It is a descriptive study which was carried out on 93 patients from September 2020 to September 2022. The inclusion criteria was patients who were ready to give written informed consent, patients with suspected PE referred by clinicians to the Department of Radiodiagnosis, and no history of allergy to the iodinated contrast media. Equipment was performed on Siemens multi-slice somato perspective, 64 rows and 128 slice machine. The data was coded and entered into Microsoft Excel for statistical analysis. My results were MDCT-PA findings of pulmonary embolism in clinically suspected patients. Out of the 93 patients, 33 were found to be positive. Age distribution, a significant amount of patients aged above 60 years were positive. Coming to gender distribution of these patients, 21 patients were male and 12 were female, putting us to a ratio of 1.75:1. Clinical history of these patients, 100% patients presented with dyspnea, 34% patients presented with chest pain, 24% with cough, and 6.5% patients presented with hemoptysis. The investigations that were done, all 100% patients had done chest radiograph, 41.9% had their D-dimer values checked, 28% had USG after pelvis done. The MDCT-PA findings in these patients, right-sided pulmonary embolism was seen in 35.5% patients, both-sided was seen in 29% patients. Other findings were also seen in these patients, pleural effusion, consolidation, infarcts, and atelectasis. The risk factors were tabularized with significant risk factors coming to DVT, previous history of venous thromboembolism, and recent history of trauma. Anatomical distribution of the location of pulmonary embolus was seen with significant embolus seen in segmental arteries, that is 90.9%, followed by subsegmental and lobar arteries. The ratio of main pulmonary artery to ascending aorta was calculated with the odds ratio of 1.5, stating that a ratio more than 1 puts you to a risk of 1.5 times more chances of pulmonary embolism. Coming to my representative cases, the axial pulmonary embolism specific window shows a left superior segmental artery thrombus and minimal effusion, and the lung window shows you a wedge-shaped opacity representing the infarcted lung. The non-enhancing thrombus is seen in bilateral upper lobar arteries and its branches. In the next picture, it is seen in the right main pulmonary artery and left descending interlobar artery. Coming to the next representative case, the patient is a 53-year-old male who presented with a sudden onset of dyspnea. Non-enhancing thrombus was seen in the main pulmonary artery extending into the left pulmonary artery. In this case, we could see an eccentric partial filling defect in the upper lobar artery and descending interlobar artery, giving a railway track sign appearance. Next case showing us a saddle thrombus, non-enhancing saddle thrombus in main pulmonary artery extending to right and left pulmonary arteries. The additional findings that we could find in such patients were commonly effusion with underlying consolidation. Partial filling defect giving us the polo mint sign and the railway track sign caused by the acute thrombus. Coming to the discussion, a total of 93 patients with clinically suspected pulmonary thromboembolism were evaluated using MDCT-PA for confirmation of pulmonary embolism within the study period after having met the inclusion criteria. The mean age of the patients was 50.9 years and the median age was 51 years. We could come to a conclusion that prevalence of PE increases with advancing age. The male to female ratio of diagnosed pulmonary embolism patients on MDCT-PA was 1.75:1. Our study results were in conclusion with various other studies which concluded that higher prevalence of PE is associated with proximal DVT in men, and the commonest clinical presentation was dyspnea in all the patients. But this is in keeping with reported literature that has shown that PE presents with non-specific symptoms. Out of the 93 suspected patients, patients having an evidence of PE, while 60 patients did not have pulmonary embolism. These results were again similar to various other studies with, that is KL et al. Study and Lombard et al. Study. The study results with maximum incidence of PE in segmental arteries were also in correlation with other studies. We found that patients with DVT and COVID-19 pneumonia history were 5.58 times more likely to have pulmonary embolism on MDCT-PA. Patients with a history of previous venous thromboembolism along with DVT were 5.18 times more likely to have PE. And patients with history of immobilization due to trauma or medical conditions as a risk factor were 8.14 times more likely to have PE. We had similar risk factor findings as mentioned in a study conducted by Tarbox et al. Coming to the conclusion of my paper, MDCT-PA reveals significant additional diagnosis which ensures appropriate patient management and is instituted without delay. Not all dyspnea is due to pulmonary embolism. Parenchymal abnormalities and pleural effusion are present in majority of patients undergoing MBCT-PA for the clinical suspicion of PE, irrespective of the presence or absence of PE. Other than wedge-shaped opacities, parenchymal and pleural abnormalities on MBCT-PA do not correlate with the presence of PE in this study. Evidence of right ventricular strain on MBCT-PA as evidenced by right ventricular to left ventricular diameter ratio more than 1 is significantly associated with pulmonary embolism and predicts risk for adverse outcomes. MBCT-PA reduces mortality and improves cost effectiveness in the diagnostic workup of suspected PE patients. These are my references. Thank you.
Have the question answer round.
How age is related? You said it is related to the age.
So with advancing age, we can see the incidence is more.
But the cause is immobilization.
Causes immobilization.
You said about coagulation studies, only 24% of your patients undergone D-dimer studies. Is it?
41.9%.
41%. Why not 100%? Because you know that it has got relation with the...
So because sometimes patients with massive pulmonary embolism do present with severe symptoms like syncope, dyspnea, severe dyspnea, tachypnea, hypotension, they present to casualty. So we do not have that.
So clinically they were not suspected to be having pulmonary edema.
Yeah,
You
many
mean to
times,
say.
yeah.
Okay, fine. Next.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Dr. Hitesh Muradia, working as a resident GR3 in the PMT Moni. Discussing about the topic called outcome of operative introduction of factor supracondylar humerus in pediatrics age group. Starting with the introduction. Supracondylar humerus fracture is the second most common fracture that is occurring in the children, account for almost 16%. Mechanism of injury is the fall on outstretched hand. Complication may be seen even in the uncomplicated fracture if it is left untreated or if it is not treated adequately. There are many modalities of treatment for supracondylar humerus fracture like traction, reduction followed by the above elbow cast or slab. But many a time and many studies show that this method have increased the risk of complications like malunion, non-union and neurovascular injury following the aggressive manipulation. So in order to maintain the reduction, we allow early mobilization of the joint. The primary fixation with the K-wire is at most important. Our aim and objective of the treatment is to study the outcome of supracondylar fracture treated with the percutaneous K-wire. A material method, this study was conducted in the Rural Medical College, Loni. We have taken the 20 cases of supracondylar humerus fracture, children ranging from the 3 years to 15 years. Study period was 1 year, June 2020 to June 21. We have imaging of the X-ray. We have taken the anterior, posterior, and the lateral view. Before they taken to the OT, all the necessary investigation, like the routine investigation needed for the anesthesia checkup, we have done this before shifting the patient. We have used the flying criteria for finding the clinical outcome of the operated patient. By using in which there are main two factors we check, that is motion and the carrying angle. There are classification, widely used classification called Gartlin classification. It has been used for the fracture supracondylar humerus. There are three types. One is the non-displaced, and type 2 there is displaced fracture with intact posterior cortex, and type 3 that is completely displaced with no connection between the cortical bone. It is further divided into posterior medial and the posterior lateral. Based on this, we plan for the intra-op manipulation. Patient when presented to the casualty, it was initially treated with the gentle manipulation and the above elbow slab till all the investigation and before shifting to the OT. surgical procedure is widely used at the same based on the mechanism of the injury and based on the type of the fracture, like the displacement of the fragment. For close reduction, in keeping the patient in the supine position after giving the GA, traction was given along the longitudinal axis, keeping the elbow in the extension and supination while counter traction. Medial lateral displacement was corrected by giving the valgus and varus forces. After satisfactory reduction checked under the SIAP, we passed 2 K wire or either 1 K wire. We take the K wire size 2 mm or either 1.2 mm by using the two methods, either from the lateral side 2 K wire or only 1 K wire and the 1 medial K wire. Both the entry of the K wire which has to be 45 degree from the angle of the humerus. And post-op X-ray were taken.
Now the audience can have the question answer round.
And this is the result we found. Yes, sir, we have X-ray of this procedure. This is a pre-op X-ray. We have taken the 2 cases for the example. And these are the results.
Why did you choose wires? Plates are also available.
Weights are also available, sir, but in pediatrics population, minimal implants is the main motto of the surgeon, and any fracture which is in acute trauma, so it can be treated closely. So this is a recent treatment. Initially we used to use slab and cast.
There is any other modality of treatment for this?
Yes, sir, there are only 2 modalities are there. So first is the conservative with the slab and cast, and one is the K-wire fixation. If fracture is intra-articular and combination is there, we might have to open the do the internal fixation with the screw.
Next.
Thank you. Now I would like Ash Mishra, JR3 Department of Orthopedics, RMC Loni.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Akash Mishra. We are presenting a paper on topic comparative study of plate versus tension band wire fixation for olecranon fracture. The contents are title, introduction, aim and objectives, material and methods, results and discussion. Olecranon fracture is an important structure. Olecranon is an important structure in maintaining the extensor mechanism. 10% of the fracture in the upper extremities are olecranon fractures. Incidence is 12 per 10,000 people. These fractures generally show a bimodal distribution. They are seen after high energy trauma in young patients and after simple falls in older patients due to poor bone quality and osteoporosis. The ultimate goal of treatment of olecranon fracture is to restore elbow functionality, including a functional range of motion, strength, pain-free joint movement. To achieve this, our goals of osteosynthesis should be anatomic articular reduction and flawless stability, allowing for early articular motion and rehabilitation. Fracture patterns ranges from transverse impacted, oblique comminuted, oblique distal, and fracture dislocation based on Schatzker classification for olecranon fracture. Restoring elbow functionality, including a functional range of motion, strength and pain-free joint mobility is an ultimate goal of treatment of olecranon fracture. Anatomic articular reduction and perfect stability should be our aims for osteosynthesis. In order to accomplish this, allowing for early articular motion and rehabilitation, even decreasing the risk of arthritis. The chance of conservative treatment is low because of the tension of triceps brachii muscle, which is attached on the posterior aspect of olecranon, and tendon, and even due to displaced fracture. The chance of conservative treatment is low because of the tension of triceps brachii muscles and the tendon, and even due to displaced fractures. The fracture fragments are not approximated and they are displaced. So conservative treatment is not a better choice in olecranon fractures. These fractures of olecranon can be treated with tension band wire fixation. The actual principle of tension band wiring is the tensile force and the distraction force of triceps gets converted to the compressive force. It could be, we can also do plate fixation and partially threaded screw. The recommended course of the therapy for displaced intra-articular fracture is open reduction and internal fixation. Simple transfer fracture can be stabilized internally with figure of 8 tension band wire fixation, allowing early motion to reduce stiffness. Complications such as implant irritation, wound problems, and joint stiffness are seen due to subcutaneous location of these methods of management, thus increasing the need for unplanned operative interventions and therefore increasing patients' morbidity. Aims and objectives are: aim is to compare the plate versus tension band wire fixation for the olecranon fractures, and the objective of this study is retrospective evaluation of the clinical and radiologic outcomes of the olecranon fracture treated with tension band wiring and plate fixation. After obtaining permission, a retrospective analysis of diagnosed and operated case of olecranon fracture was conducted in the Department of Orthopedics in Pravara Medical College, Loni. Medical records of these patients were reviewed who were operated for the same in between a duration of 2016 to 2021. Records of 22 patients meeting the mentioned inclusion and exclusion criteria were analyzed. There were a total of 12 men and 10 women with a 42-year-old average age. Out of total 22 patients, 14 presented with history of RTA, while other were due to accidental fall. According to Mayo classification, 22 fractures, there are 14 type 2A, 6 type 2B, and 2 type 3B fractures. Inclusion and exclusion criteria were: inclusion criteria, the patient should have olecranon fracture, treatment done either with tension band wiring or with plate fixation, and age of the patient should be more than 18 years. Exclusion criteria was radiological and clinical follow-up less than 6 months, other associated elbow lesions, and compound fractures. So the results were: out of total 22 cases, tension band wiring was performed in 15 patients, and plate fixation was done in 7 patients, that was 31.81%. Out of 22 cases, complication was seen in 7 patients, and out of 7 due to symptomatic implants, that was due to irritation from the.
Now the audience can have the question answer round.
This is my conclusion of the study. The tension band wiring is superior than the plate fixation because plate fixation was superior than tension band wiring because there were quite complications that was present in tension band wiring.
Why that you have selected this study as a retrospective? Why you couldn't do prospective?
Sir, because I did not get that much patience in the.
So just additional 2 years, you had more number.
3 years, sir. Yes, sir. Total 5 years.
So only 5 years.
Yeah. Total 5 years studies have been done, and I've started the study since last 1.5 years. So I did not get that much patience. So I started. I took it retrospectively.
Do you think that different surgeons that are doing this operation will make difference in the results? Because here the 5 years is a big period where you can have changes in the staff of faculties. So how your study then matters if the surgeon is not same?
Actually, sir, the difference will be just because of the techniques used by different surgeons. Like every surgeon has different technique to do the surgery, but the procedure is the same thing. The procedure is the same. Either you are doing plating or you are doing tension band wiring. So the procedure is same. Only the technique is different by various surgeons. That bias can come, but I don't think, sir, that was a.
And you had patients with infection, isn't it?
Yeah,
open
complication, yes.
So that is there at the time of injury, isn't it?
Yes.
So the number of patients having infection or say the wound is soiled with some dust and all. So how many patients you had like this and those who were not really infected, or you detected it afterwards?
Yes, infection.
Debridement was required.
Infection in tension band wiring group, it was one, sir. One patient was infected in tension band wiring group, and plating there was none. So there was one in plating group and one in tension band wiring group. So the infection rate was the same in both the groups.
Okay, next.
Thank you. Now I would like to call.
Good evening, everyone. My topic for today is study of electrocardiographic, echocardiographic, and coronary angiographic findings with respect to myocardial infarction.
Cardiovascular disease is a collective term used for heart and blood vessels related diseases. This includes coronary heart disease, stroke, and peripheral vascular disease. Coronary heart disease is the most prevalent form of CVD, comprised of coronary vasculature disorders and frequently manifest as coronary artery disease. Acute coronary syndrome and stable angina account for two major forms of coronary heart disease. The terms ACS refers to a group of clinical symptoms caused by active myocardial ischemia, which includes acute myocardial infarction that can be ST elevated MI and non-ST elevated MI with unstable angina pectoris. The electrocardiogram has been a preliminary screening and one of the most useful diagnostic investigations in myocardial infarction. Coronary angiography has led to significantly improved understanding of coronary artery disease, function of the myocardium, and also helped to delineate the anatomy of coronary vessels to find the occlusion in the coronary circulation causing myocardial ischemia. Two-dimensional echocardiography is one of the most useful imaging methods due to its availability, ease of use, price, capacity to serve as bedside technique, and repeatability. It is the most employed cardiovascular imaging modality for assessment of cardiovascular diseases and is often performed in patients without a history of ischemic heart disease. The present study was done to evaluate the correlation between findings of myocardial infarction and ECG, a 2D echo, and CAG, and also to find out the site of myocardial infarction. Aims and objectives of the study were to study ECG, 2D echo, and CAG findings for the site of lesion in myocardial infarction, to determine that an inexpensive 12-lead electrocardiogram can provide useful information in identifying the infarct-related artery in acute ST elevated MI. The source of data was conducted in a tertiary care teaching hospital situated in the rural area of Ahmednagar district. A total of 90 patients of acute myocardial infarction were concluded in the study, and the period of study was between October 2019 to September 2021. The study was a descriptive analytical study. 90 patients of acute MI getting admitted in the tertiary care hospital were included in the study. A well-informed documented consent was taken in oral and written in understandable vernacular language, preferably local language of the patient, and confidentiality was assured. All the selected patients were subjected to detailed history taking, detailed clinical examination, biochemical investigations, ECG, 2D echo, and CAG. Inclusion criteria were patients having chest pain or discomfort lasting more than 30 minutes, ECG showing changes of myocardial infarction, ST elevation, and elevation of cardiac troponins, cardiac enzymes, and CKMB markers. Exclusion criteria were patients who did not undergo 2D echo or coronary angiography, or patients who did not give any consent. According to the study, in ECGs with extensive anterior wall MI, patients had occlusion in left anterior descending arteries, maximum 19. In lateral wall MI, maximum were found in left circumflex artery. In anterior septal MI, maximum were found in left anterior descending arteries. In anterior lateral wall MI, maximum were found in left anterior descending arteries. In septal wall, also left anterior descending arteries. In anterior wall, left anterior descending. In inferior wall, right coronary artery, and high lateral wall, left circumflex artery. In correlation between the 2D echo and ECG, when the patient with a left anterior descending artery was subjected to 2D echo, a patient had hypokinesia in the anterior or anterior septal wall compared to global hypokinesia, which was very less, only 2 out of 54. Patients with blockage in the left circumflex artery, patient had maximum hypokinesia in anterior septal wall, and 3 of them were in inferior wall. In patients having a blockage in right circumflex artery, right coronary artery, the hypokinesia were more in the inferior wall. Thus, to conclude that anterior wall infarction was most common infarction recorded from ECG findings, and all the patients of anterior wall infarction showed left anterior descending occlusion on CAG, and similarly 2D echo revealed anterior wall hypokinesia, whereas inferior wall infarction and lateral wall infarction recorded on ECG had right coronary artery and left circumflex occlusion on coronary angiography, and inferior wall and lateral wall hypokinesia on 2D echo. Thank you.
Now the audience can have the question answer round.
Coronary angiography corresponds to the exposure to dyes, which affects the renal component of the patient and the liver. We have seen patients with renal complications after angioplasty leading to dye-induced nephropathy.
So it is the only thing that is functionally.
So we can reduce the exposure. If we are sure that blockage is more towards the specific artery, then one sitting will be finished.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call Dr. Ranjit Patil, third year resident, Department of Medicine, RMC Loni.
Good evening, everybody. Myself, Dr. Ranjit Patil, medicine postgraduate, and today's topic of discussion is correlation of serum transaminases with dengue serology, which has been done under the guidance of Dr. Varade sir. So the word dengue is derived from the Swahili phrase that is "Katim Pepo," which describes the diseases being caused by the evil spirit. Dengue virus is a member of genus Flavivirus and family Flaviridae, which is an arthropod-borne disease and includes the 4 different serotypes, namely 1, 2, 3, and 4. Liver is the commonest organ involved in the dengue. The hepatic manifestations are either a result of direct viral toxicity or dysregulated immunologic injury in response to the virus. The spectrum of disease involves asymptomatic elevation of hepatic transaminases to occurrence of severe manifestation in the form of acute liver failure. With this background, the present cross-sectional observational study was planned to correlate the serum transaminases levels and with the dengue serology. The aims and objective of the study was to correlate the serum transaminases levels with the dengue serology in the patients presenting in tertiary rural care center. The inclusion criteria of the study involved patients positive with either of the dengue serology, namely NS1, IgM or IgG, and patients with age more than 12 years and patients who were willing to give the written and informed consent. The exclusion criteria included patients with documented alcoholic liver disease, hepatitis B positive patients, and patients who were not willing to give any written consent. All the selected patients were subjected to the detailed history taking, clinical examination, and pathological and biological with microbiological investigations. The data of each patient was collected on a proforma specially designed for the study and which included demographic details of the patient, detailed history, chief complaints, vitals, addiction history, blood investigations like hemoglobin, total leukocyte count, platelet count, dengue serology, and liver function test, along with HbA1c and HCV. For detecting dengue serology, a venofunction was done from the cubital fossa and 5 ml of blood was sent in the red vacuolator. And for bilirubin and serum transaminases, the blood was 5 ml of blood was sent in the red vacuolator, which was drawn from the cubital fossa. Observations and the results. The distribution of patients according to dengue serology. Maximum patients were from the had the NS1 antigen positive, which was 156 number of patients, which concluded for 78% of the total patients. Serum transaminases in the dengue patients. So in total dengue patients, maximum elevation was seen for SGOT, for which one standard deviation, that is 67% patient, 67.5% patients showed one standard deviation for rise in SGOT, and for SGPT, 59% patients shows one standard deviation rise. Serum transaminases, according to the dengue serology, the maximum patients with the rise of SGOT with one standard deviation was seen in NS1, and SGPT 37% patients were seen in NS1. Statistical analysis was done by the descriptive statistics as mean standard deviation percentage, etc. The analysis of qualitative variables was done by applying Z-test for difference between the two sample proportions at 5% and 1% level of significance. The analysis of quantitative variables was done by applying students' unpaired t-test. The statistical analysis software named the SysStat version was used for analysis. From the study, we concluded that maximum number of patients were seen in the age group of 21 to 30 years. Maximum number of patients, that is 156 patients, approximately 78% were NS1 antigen positive. Among total cases, 135 patients had raised SGOT within one standard deviation. and among total cases, 59%, that is 118 patients, had raised SGPT within 1 standard deviations. In NS1 antigen positive patients, the SGOT within 1 standard deviation was 40%, that is 63 patients, while in SGPT it was 37%, that is 59 patients. From the observations made, it was further concluded that serum aminotransferases are significantly increased in all the types of dengue infection. SGOT was raised more than the SGPT in all the dengue infections. Raised serum aminotransferases had direct relationship with the severity of the disease. Patients who were positive with NS1 antigen had raised serum aminotransferases when compared to IgM and IgG antibody positive patients. Therefore, it is concluded finally that serum SGOT and SGPT levels are indicators for evaluating liver injury in dengue infection and for diagnosis and treatment effect. Dengue fever should be considered when liver functions are deranged, apart from the routine hepatotropic viruses. An increase in serum aminotransferases has been associated with disease severity. Thanks.
Now the audience can have the question answer round.
In your conclusion, you have said that SGOT, SGPT levels are indicator of limiting liver injury. Do you mean to say that these are not indicator for in other diseases? Only in dengue this parameter is used?
So actually, the patients with fever which are presenting to us with no other hepatotropic viruses positive, in those patients we should, if the SGOTs and SGPTs is deranged, so we should go for treatment of dengue infection even if the antigen or antibody is not seen.
See, your aim is to compare with serology of dengue and serological studies of liver indicators, liver function indicators.
Yes.
So, there is no comparison. You have said that this SGOT, in one line you have said that your NS1 antigen is related to more incidence of serological indicators of liver. That's the only line which is related in relation to your study. The rest of it is not related to your study.
Can we please have some silence from the audience at the back?
Fine, next.
Thank you.
Today, my paper's topic is NT-proBNP levels in type 2 diabetes without any cardiovascular disease. BNP is a peptide hormone synthesized largely by myocytes in response to myocardial stretch in the form of P-proBNP, which is cleaved to proBNP, and then it's proteolized by serine endopeptidase, choline, and furin to active C-terminal, 32 amino acid BNP, and inactive 76 amino acid N-terminal proBNP. NT-proBNP level increases in the presence of both symptomatic and asymptomatic left ventricular dysfunction with hemodynamic overload. NT-proBNP is more sensitive with a longer half-life of 2 hours and a preferable to BNP and ANP for the detection of heart failure and acute myocardial infarction. Several studies have shown that proBNP levels is higher in diabetics. The aim of the study is to study the proBNP levels in the type 2 diabetes mellitus subjects. Objectives are to measure proBNP levels in subjects with type 2 diabetes mellitus to find significance of proBNP predicting heart failure. The study included 42 patients diagnosed with type 2 diabetes mellitus according to the WHO criteria attending the outpatient or inpatient of our hospital. The patients were informed about the study in all respects and informed consent was obtained. Period of study was from January 2021 to June 2022. Study design was this analytical, non-interventional observational study. 42 patients attending our hospital in Loni diagnosed with diabetes mellitus was selected for the study. Nature and purpose of the study was explained to the patient and informed consent was taken from those who were willing in participation. Patients present and past medical history was recorded and detailed physical examination was done. A detailed history, general physical examination, systemic examination, investigation was performed on all patients who fulfilled the inclusion criteria. Inclusion criteria was including all patients with diabetes mellitus without any known cardiovascular disease. Exclusion criteria was diabetic patients with any cardiovascular disease, patients aged more than 75 years of age, because NT-proBNP levels becomes higher even in non-diabetic old persons. Patients with history of cardiac disease and those on medications to the same, and patients with history of chronic liver disease or chronic kidney disease. The results was the association between the left ventricular ejection fraction and pro-BNP. The association between the left ventricular ejection fraction and serum pro-BNP level was evaluated with Pearson's correlation coefficient. This was negative correlation between LVEF and pro-BNP level. The discussion, total 12 patients subjected had normal diastolic function. Subjects had grade 1 diastolic functions were 15. Subjects, 13 were of grade 2 diastolic dysfunction, 2 were of grade 3 diastolic dysfunction. There is a positive correlation between pro-BNP levels and grades of diastolic dysfunction. Majority of the subjects had duration of diabetes mellitus less than 5 years. 23 subjects were followed by 5 to 10 years duration, and 14 were of more between 5 to 10 years, and 5 were at 10 to 15 years duration. The mean duration of diabetes mellitus was 4.6 years. There was a positive correlation between pro-BNP and duration of diabetes mellitus. Conclusion: with the increase in the number of patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus in India, it is evident that the burden of heart failure in Indian population will be the mirror of the global picture in the future. Considering this, in the present study, the association between the serum pro-BNP levels and various factors in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus was evaluated. There was negative correlation between left ventricular ejection fraction pro-BNP and had a positive correlation between pro-BNP and rates of diastolic dysfunction. Thus, we can conclude that the measure of pro-BNP level in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus will be valuable for early prediction of heart failure and its outcomes. It's almost same because in laboratory we send anti-pro-BNP model.
Thank you. Now,
my study is about the impact of functional endoscopic sinus surgery on chronic sinusitis symptom profile. Introduction. Chronic rhinosinusitis is a clinical disorder that encompasses a heterogeneous group of infectious and inflammatory conditions affecting all the paranasal sinuses, which can affect various populations irrespective of age and gender, and is one of the most often diagnosed chronic medical conditions due to its high predisposition to the lifestyle changes. The true extent of specific disease process of chronic rhinosinusitis cannot be just determined by either clinical or diagnostic methods. Given the need to assess morbidity, disease progression, and therapeutic impact more accurately, specific measures to measure the quality of life and associated with chronic rhinosinusitis have been created. Numerous studies, including Rhinosinusitis Disability Index, Chronic Sinusitis Survey, and Modified RSI Scoring, and 22-STEM Sinonasal Outcome Test Score has been used. These offer reliable ways to measure how much of the burden of the disease is on the patient in terms of symptoms, both before and after the surgery. In my study, I have used RSI scoring and 22-step sinonasal outcome test. Even though many surgical procedures exist for sinus surgery, with a long history of success rate, functional endoscopic sinus surgery today become mainstay surgical option to treat refractory CRS, as it is minimally invasive and has less post-op complications. The sinonasal outcome test scoring used in the study, it was developed in 2003. It comprises of major symptoms and minor symptoms and psychosocial factors, and it has 22 items asked in the form of a questionnaire, ranging from 0 to 5. 0 has no problems and 5 has the worst problem as it can be. And it has been shown to have good reliability, validity and responsiveness, and it can be correlated with RSI scoring as well. And it takes only 7 minutes to complete the questionnaire, and it is very simple and understandable to the patient. The main aims and objectives of the study are it is to evaluate and compare the symptom profile of chronic rhinosinusitis before and after surgery, and to assess the efficacy on the long-term basis of the FES surgery, and to establish FES as the standard treatment modality in patients with refractory CRS. That is the CRS patients which have not been cured even after the medical management. The origins of paranasal sinus surgery. According to estimates, chronic rhinosinusitis is more prevalent than arthritic disease, hypertension, and has significant impact on quality of life than chronic disabling conditions like diabetes and congestive heart failure. One of the most prevalent health issues for which people seek medical care is CRS today, which is associated with high direct medical costs, diagnostic tests, antibiotics, and other medications. Even though the history of PNS surgery dates back centuries, it was until Hirschman who has invented endoscope using modified cystoscope to examine middle meatus. In 20th century, sinonasal endoscope became finally firmly established as a crucial tool in diagnostic and therapeutic toolbox for patients with chronic rhinosinusitis. There are basically two fundamental approaches, the Messer-Klinger method and Weigand technique. In our study, we have used the Messer-Klinger method, which is from anterior to posterior. We work from maxillary sinus to frontal sinus. The main guidelines for diagnosis of chronic rhinosinusitis is acute sinusitis, which is 7 days to less than 4 weeks, subacute rhinosinusitis, which is 4 to 12 weeks, and recurrent acute rhinosinusitis, more than 4 episodes of ARS per year. And chronic rhinosinusitis is more than 12 weeks, which is refractory to any medical management. The materials and methods of the study are, sample size is around 132. It is a descriptive longitudinal study, and the study group consists of patients above 12 years fulfilling the criteria of diagnosis of CRS patients attending ENT department, Pravra Institute. And this study was selected by simple random method, and the proforma was designed based on objectives of the study, and TFR criteria, Task Force of Rhinosinusitis criteria, was employed to group the patients according to various symptomatology, and SNOT-22 questionnaire was also used pre-op and post-op after 6-month follow-up. The inclusion criteria of the study was all the diagnosed patients of CRS and all patients with sinusitis symptoms and lasting for at least 12 weeks, and both endoscopic and radiological evidence of sinusitis, and all the patients who are above 12 years are only included. It is to avoid the error of the grading symptoms, and patients giving informed and written consent. Exclusion criteria was patients with nasal obstruction such as gross deviated nasal septum and structural abnormalities. And previous nasal surgery is also excluded, and any malignant growths in nasal cavity except sinonasal polyposis is excluded.
Now the audience can have the question answer round.
This is the preoperative symptom profile. Most common symptom was nasal obstruction. And this is the mean scores. Post-op a significant improvement in the mean score. FES is the minimally and safe effective procedure in treating refractory CRS, as it is minimally invasive, and the mucosa has not been altered, and the anatomy is also not been altered after the surgery. Functional endoscopic sinus surgery. Sir, in patients with sinonasal polyposis and chronic rhinosinusitis, with the use of endoscope, no external incision, we clear out all the sinuses and restore the normal mucociliary function. Thank you.
I would like to call upon Dr. Banod Sai Lakshmi from GMC Yavatmal.
Evaluate the risk factors of surgical site infection. Surgical site infection, pre-resident or post-operative wound infection, is defined as that infection presenting up to 30 days after a surgical procedure if no prosthetic is placed, and up to 1 year if a prosthetic is implanted in the patient. SSI is found to be a serious complication with an incidence of 2% to 5% in patients undergoing surgery. SSI was found to be second only to urinary tract infection as the commonest hospital-acquired infection, and actually the most commonly encountered form of nosocomial infection in surgical patients. Risk factors into degree of microbial contamination of the operation site indicated by the wound class as clean, contaminated and dirty, and also by patient age, length of the surgery, preoperative shading of the operative site, and comorbidities. Majority of the organisms causing SSI are gram-positive cocci, example Staph aureus, and gram-negative bacilli like E. coli. However, the most significant change in the microbiology of SSI has been the increased involvement of resistant organisms like MRSA. The aim of this study is to investigate the risk factors for SSI together with the identification of the etiological, bacteriological agents and their antimicrobial susceptibility in the major teaching hospital.
Around 131 patients were admitted in the surgical ward and surgical intensive care unit were included in the study. Demographic data of the patients and diagnostic criteria were included. Other data including associated risk factors, use of prophylactical antimicrobial agents, the type and duration of surgery, clinical evaluation of the wound, and laboratory data were recorded. An operation was defined as any procedure involving skin incision undertaken in an operating theatre under any type of anesthesia. The operations were classified as clean, contaminated, and dirty. Swabs from deep part of the wound or pus were taken from the infected surgical sites. Specimens were gram stained and examined for the presence of organisms, and pus was cultured aerobically and anaerobically. The results include one of the 131 patients in the study, 93 were males and 38 were females. Age ranged between 15 to 80 years. 23 patients had bacteria isolated from the surgical site, and 6.8% of the patients showed frank clinical infection with needed drainage of pus and frequent dressing. The emergency operation showed a frequently higher rate of infection compared to elective operations. The rate of SSI was significantly higher in diabetic patients in comparison of non-diabetics. A rate of SSI was higher in females than in males. A rate of SSI was higher in contaminated operations compared to clean contaminated and clean operations. Antimicrobial susceptibility of these 23 bacteria was stated as either a multi-drug resistant organism resistant to more than 3 categories of antimicrobials used for the treatment of infections usually caused by such bacteria, or a non-MDR organism. 2 of the Staphylococcus aureus isolates were methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, one of which was community-acquired MRSA, which was susceptible beside the glycopeptides to rifampicin, trimethyl sulfamethoxazole, clindamycin, and erythromycin. Out of 131 patients operated in the present study, 93 were males. Our study showed a rate of SSI of 6.4% in males compared to the 7.8% in females. As to the effect of age, the rate of SSI in the present study was highest in the age group 30 to 60 years, followed by the age group greater than 60 years. Patients of 15 to 29 years of age, the SSI rate was low in the group. There was a significantly higher rate of SSI in emergency operations compared to routine elective surgeries. Regarding associated risk factors in the series, SSI was significantly higher in diabetic patients when compared to non-diabetics. In this study, the rate of SSI was judged by clinical wound assessment was 6.8%, although positive bacterial cultures were more. The bacterial culture reflected the sites of operation, with E. coli being the most commonly isolated bacteria in the perineal and the abdominal operations. Neither Acinetobacter species nor MRSA were common isolates in the series. The rate of surgical infection in diabetic patients and those who underwent emergency operations were significantly higher than others. Other comorbidities did not directly affect the rate of SSI in this series. Thank you.
That you have shown that table relation to anemia. I mean, what difference is going to make with this study? You haven't compared anything like use of suture material, use of antiseptics, various different sequence, preparation of the skin. All these things are not included. It is just the presence of absence of diabetes or what organism you got. This is just the incidence you have seen, but not in relation to the treatment part and how your study is going to really improve the treatment of next patient. That's not been considered here. Okay, next.
Thank you. Now I would like to call Dr. Karan Bagade, third year resident, Ortho.
Good evening, sir. Good evening to everyone. My today's topic is usefulness of 3 common classification in the management of coccygeal tibia fracture. Introduction. The coccygeal tibia fracture are one of the most common intra-articular fractures seen in the proximal tibia. The majority of tibial plateau fractures are secondary to high-speed velocity accidents and fall from height, where fractures result from direct axial compression, usually with a valgus force, more common, or a varus movement and indirect shear forces. These type of fractures are mainly seen in RTA. In spite of all the advances, proximal fractures of tibia still pose a challenge to the orthopedic surgeon due to the following reasons: presence of hinge joint at the knee and the ankle, which allows no adjustment for rotatory deformity after fracture, occurrence of open fracture, and higher rate of post-operative infections. The aim of the study was to use the 3-column classification in the management of proximal tibia fractures. Material and methodology. The study design was a prospective observational type of study for over a period of 1 year. Study population was patient which came to the casualty or to the OPD with closed proximal tibia fracture. My sample size was 50. This study was conducted in the orthopedic department of Pravara Medical College. The results were mean age was of 39 years, ranging from 20 years to 70 years, irrespective of either of the sexes. Most common etiology was road traffic accident followed by fall from height. The patient which was suffering the road traffic accident and followed by the fall from height were included in this kind of study. The type of fracture depending on Shadgar's classification included with 3 columns were type 1, type 2 and type 3. In type 1 fractures, usually the frequency was seen as 30, which was the more, in which there was only a split depression fracture seen in the proximal part of the tibial platform, due to which it was an intra-articular extension resulting into joint disruption. Then type 2, 15% frequency was seen, and type 3, 5%. The most common type of surgery that was done for following using 3-column classification was splitting, that was 72%, then 20% followed by CC screw fixation, and 8% only external fixation for the fractures which have included an open wound suffered by the RTs. The complications were seen in 5 cases. Most common was pain, swelling and delayed healing. 45% of there were no complications. My total study was a 50 group. So the outcome was good in 47% people frequency and poor in 3 patients. So discussion was included by the study of Liu et al. First also showed that mean age was 27.3 years. Study by Weijenkar et al. And 2 showed that 63.1% single, 31.5% 2-column and only 5.2% tri-columnar was included, and Mehin et al. 3 had 60 single column. So my conclusion is 3-column Shadgar classification makes it easy for an orthopedic surgeon to identify and manage such injuries, as tibia injuries are more common among the younger age group, so early diagnosis and treatment will further prevent complications. These were the references that were being used in this study and to make a following presentation. Thank you.
There is no table correlating with your what is 3-column and relation of the operations.
Sir, usually only Shadgar's classification is being used in tibial fractures. So my plan was that if we use 3-column classification, this is mainly based on city. So we get to know the different, like tibia is a triangular bone. So if we do not miss any etiology and if the patient is requiring bicolumnar plating, then this thing can be used. So it is better to.
Column 1 required fixation, column 2 required different modality.
No, sir, I have made a pie diagram for that. Like if it was including, sir, 72% patients that had suffered an injury, they were classified according to the Shadgar's 3-column classification. The majority of them were used for bicolumnar plating, sir.
Where is the correlation? Correlation with your treatment, rating, schooling, etc. Where is the correlation with your column? Nothing is
So now, is there any specific slide in CT scan that we can
used for classifying the column? Like
I did that, but yes, there is a clinical correlation also. When you see the in CT, there is an axial section which has been shown, which allows you to see the 3 column classification factors which have been used, because most of the time the posterior column of the tibia has been missed out inside normally on X-rays.
But it can be seen in the lateral view as well.
But if it's an undisplaced fracture and it is including the tibial plafond and going intra-articularly, then we need to find it on X-rays.
Thank you. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Priyanka Salunke, the 3rd year JR in Department of General Surgery from GMC Yavatmal.
Good evening everyone. My study paper is on validation of Ripasa scoring system in diagnosis of acute appendicitis and its correlation with intraoperative and histopathological findings. It is a cross-sectional study conducted in GMC Yavatmal. Acute appendicitis, though one of the commonest emergencies worldwide in surgical practice, can at times confuse the best clinicians. Another scoring system, that is Ripasa scoring system, has been derived for diagnosis of acute appendicitis, which is more suitable for Middle East and Asian population, and suggested population for patient having a score of 7.5 or above out of 15.5. The Ripasa, the long form of the Ripasa is Raja Istri Pingiram Anar Saleha appendicitis. The score was developed in 2010 in Brunei and tested and replicated in Asian and Middle East population in Pakistan, China, India, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. It is comprised of 15 demographic, clinical and laboratory based parameters and has a sensitivity of 97% and specificity 81%. For acute appendicitis in Eastern population at a cut-off score of 7.5%. It is a simple qualitative scoring system based on 14 fixed clinical parameters. 2 are demographic, 5 are clinical symptoms, 5 are clinical signs and 2 investigations. And 1 additional parameter is for foreign population, that is foreign national identity card. Even though it is developed for local community, it is suggested to be applicable to all regions with the exception of last parameter. According to the current study, the Ripasa scoring system has found to be superior to modified Alvarado scoring system, which is most commonly used in diagnosis of acute appendicitis. As per Ripasa score, appendicitis is diagnosed as less than 5 score is less probability of acute appendicitis, 5 to 7 is low probability, 7.5 to 11.5 is high probability of acute appendicitis, and if the score is more than 12, it is absolute acute appendicitis. Objective of my study is to evaluate the validation of Ripasa scoring system in diagnosis of acute appendicitis and its correlation with intraoperative finding and histopathological findings. Methodology study was observational prospective study. Study was done in tertiary healthcare center attached to medical college in Yavatmal. The population included in study was patient admitted in tertiary healthcare center with the right iliac fossa pain suspicious of acute appendicitis. Research of the study was conducted in the group of 100 patients who underwent appendicectomy in the Department of General Surgery, GMC Yavatmal, with satisfying inclusion and exclusion criteria. The study involved applying of Ripasa score in all 100 patients and findings were correlated with that of the intraoperative and histopathological findings. The Ripasa score system used preoperatively to detect appendicitis showed association of 97.5% with cases of histopathologically proven cases of acute appendicitis. Ripasa score showed sensitivity of 97.5%, specificity of 80%, positive predictive value of 95.1% and negative predictive value of 88.9%. The findings suggest Ripasa score as a better diagnostic scoring system in our local population. In addition, there is significant reduction in the number of negative appendicectomies in prediction, which will lead to less morbidity to the patient and will help in reducing unnecessary expenditure of the health resources in the country. Conclusion: in this study, incidence is almost equal in both male and female population. Out of 100 patients who underwent appendicectomy, 80 patients were confirmed to have appendicitis by histopathological examination. Thus, negative appendicectomy rate was 20%. Out of 80 cases of histopathologically confirmed appendicitis, Ripasa score identified 78 cases. On the other hand, When Ripasa score was suggested unlikely to be appendicitis in 18 cases, histopathologically turned out to be negative in 16 cases. Thus, it has detected appendicitis in 97.5% of the cases. And there is significant reduction in the number of negative appendicectomies. Ripasa score is a safe, simple, safe and easy and non-invasive new diagnostic tool in diagnosing acute appendicitis, especially in rural population who are in low and middle socioeconomic class, where radiological diagnostic tools are not easily available. Also has higher sensitivity, specificity.
Now the session is open for question and answer round.
This is the Ripasa scoring sheet where I will mark the score according to patient and take the decision of appendicectomy.
Ripasa score.
Yes.
Appendicectomy, negative appendicectomy, 20%.
Yes.
So in 20%, what was the diagnosis?
Sir, histopathologically there was normal appendicitis. The appendix was normal.
And those cases were diagnosed later on as?
Sir, when I took patient for appendicectomy, the score was above 7.5. So I considered it according to Ripasa as a appendicitis patient. And when the appendicectomy was done, after the histopathological report, it was came normal. So that was negative.
The symptoms were there.
Yes.
What doctor is asking.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Symptoms were there.
What was the diagnosis then if it is not appendicitis? What has cured the symptom?
What was the symptom?
Sir, symptoms were right iliac fossa pain, vomiting, nausea, fever.
WBC count?
Yes, sir. Raised WBC count. That was included in my criteria.
Ripasa score should be more than 12.
More than 12. If it is more than 7.5, it is considered as acute appendicitis. If it is more than 12.5, it is absolutely acute appendicitis.
Less than 12.
Yes, it was. Less than 12. Yes.
It should be more than 12.
So it is more than 12, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr.
Good evening everyone. I am present in management of case of severe dry eye by labile buccal salivary gland transplantation under guidance of Dr. Kishore Padhe sir, Professor and HOD of Department of Ophthalmology, IMC Loni. History: a 35-year-old female presented in OPD at Logal Rural Hospital, Loni with complaints of loss of vision in right eye since age of 18 years, dryness, foreign body sensation and weakness sensation in right eye, and whitening of right eye cornea. At age of 10 years, the patient had fever for which she was treated, but she had skin eruption due to some drug allergy. She narrates that the right eye continued to be red and had foreign body sensation. She took the treatment with ophthalmologist and was diagnosed to have decreased tear secretion in right eye. In spite of treatment, her symptoms continued with diminution of vision and whitening of cornea. She probably had erythema multiforme. Examination: vision, right eye, perception of light present, left eye 6/6 vision and eye was normal. Right eye, lid thickened with margins, implant and sticky discharge, conjunctiva inflamed, dry and xerotic, cornea slightly shallow with fibrotic band and scanty thick discharge. Cornea completely opacified with keratinization, the corneal surface dry. Anterior segment details and fundus could not be visualized due to corneal opacity. Oral cavity was examined for salivary secretion and were found to be adequate. Investigation: Sherman test was done. There was less than 1 mm of wetting of paper. It is a case of severe dry eye. Hematological investigations are within normal limit. Management: considering the serious state of right dry eye and irregular non-compliance of patient, it was decided to have permanent solution. There were very There were few references in literature of lobar salivary gland transplantation. As the patient has normal salivary secretion, it was decided to do lobar buccal salivary gland transplantation. Management. The operation was carried out under local anesthesia by periburbar block. The stay suture was taken to stabilize eyeball. In some conjunctival space, a saline injected in conus to elevate the conjunctiva. The lower lip was inverted and local infiltration of lignocaine with adrenaline was done. Elliptical cut of 8 by 5 mm taken with 50 number blade. The incision was deep until the muscular layer was reached, and then using blunt pointed scissors, graft was obtained by dissection. It was examined under microscope for presence of salivary gland. The muscle wound was sectioned with 40 micron. The horizontal incision of approximately 5 mm in temporal region of conjunctiva in bottom of cornix was taken. The graft containing the salivary gland was implanted in cornix and sutured. The stay suture was removed. Result. On post-operative day 5, it was noticed she was wetting in upper half of cornea and slight reduction in opacification of upper cornea. The patient was followed up after 21 days and found that wetting was increased and was also seen in lower corneas. The patient has marked relief of symptoms of giddiness and foreign body sensation. After 6 weeks, the Sherman test was performed and wetting of 5 mm was noticed. After 3 months, the patient was totally symptom-free and comfortable. The ocular surface was noticeably wet and corneal opacification was reduced. Result. There is encouraging result with buccal salivary gland transplantation for severe dry eye refractory to treatment with artificial tears. If the secretion sufficiently improves, we can plan for keratoplasty. The other option is tattoo, which will be cosmetically good. These are preferences. We can try for artificial tears, autologous serum, and anti-inflammatory drugs such as oral steroids and cyclosporine. And we also use parotid drug transposition and there are not much studies. There are 3 to 4 studies.
सर समोर सर सर थोड़ा सा
Thank you, sir. I would now like to request Kude sir to felicitate Dr. Ajit Deshpande sir, Professor, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Pravara Institute of Medical Sciences, Lodi.
Last paper is a poster rather than a paper. It was only one patient which has presented, so it goes in poster. But I difference in treatment of dry eyes. So all credit to one who has operated. Thank you.
सर थोडंच फक्त ओके समोर रेडी
See, MasterCon is Maharashtra State IMA conference was organized at MasterCon 22. That's IMA Maharashtra State annual conference was organized at St. Lawrence Spiritual Resort, Shirdi, from 17th to 20th of November. We had office bearer meeting on 17th, council meeting on 18th, and the main conference was on 19th and 20th, which was in physical as well as online format, and there were many more registrations, more than 1,500 registrations offline and more than 4,000 registrations online. Now, Dr. Kishore Bade sir, advisory of MasterCon Organizing Committee, I will request his views and observations regarding the MasterCon. Brief.
Thank you, Dr. Kute.
Dr. K. Organizing Committee Chairperson Dr. Kili Mundara and Dr. Rajendra Chaudhary, I request them to come on the dais.
Thank you, Dr. Kute. First thing, I would like to congratulate Dr. Kute, the President-elect of the MasterCon. And it is a very proud moment for every one of us, member of the Srirampur IMA branch. Regarding organization, I give 100% credits to him and his team for organizing a wonderful conference with so much delegates registered, and it was a feast of scientific programs in covering all the faculties of the medicine, and giving an opportunity to everyone to present his research work or his articles and presentations. I congratulate the chairman, Dr. Mundara, who worked effortlessly. On the contrary, we have to tell him that Dr. Mundara, take rest. You look so worked out. I congratulate Dr. Rajendra Chaudhary, the treasurer, and all the members of Srirampur Shirdi IMA who have given their best to make the MasterCon a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kishore Bade sir. Now, Dr. Ajit Deshpande, who is examiner for the paper presentation, as well as he is observer, Maharashtra Medical Council observer for the MasterCon. Yes, your comments, sir. And Professor of Gynecology at Pravara Rural Hospital, Loni.
Well, thank you for giving me opportunity to attend MasterCon as an observer. And yes, I'm part of host team, so I'm working from both sides. But then the immense work, a Herculean task, which was really a difficult one, to cover all of the Maharashtra, to communicate them, get the things done. All societies, they have different people with a different angle of looking at it, to motivate them and get things done. Hats off to Dr. Kute. He really has worked. I've seen his work pattern. I don't know from where he gets energy to travel the whole of the Maharashtra to communicate and physically visit. I mean, morning I could see the photographs of at Kolhapur, evening he is in Srirampur taking some CME, again attending at Nasik and operating at midnight at Nevasa. And that too, very difficult surgeries, very critical patients. I mean, from where he gets energy, I don't know. But he has really worked for last 2-3 years. He is putting his efforts in that, right from election and then after elections, to take good opportunity of his post to work for it right from day one with MasterCon. So I congratulate him. Again, Dr. Mundara. He's a backbone, I would say. He doesn't talk much, but he works more. and the stress which you can see on his face will tell you that how much work he is taking for that. And of course, Dr. Chaudhary, though he is always smiling, he is also putting his efforts equally. And Dr. Dange, he has also, in being Shirdi, he has coordinated well Shirdi and Srirampur, and he has taken care of many other things in conference at Shirdi. So it has made Dr. Kute's work easy. So I congratulate all of them for the task they have done. And yes, now they must be feeling relieved at the end of conference. And yes, it is 100% successful conference, Dr. Kute and team. I congratulate you to all of you and thank you.
Felicitation of Dr. Kishore Bade and Dr. Ajit Deshpande by Organizing Committee Chairperson Dr. K.D. Mundara.
सर या साइड सर या सर
बोर्ड लावा काम तुम्ही केलेलं आहे कौतुक
I request Indrani Mayuresh to come on the dais and Aishwarya also.
Sir, here. Sir, here. Sir, some more. Sir. Sir, here. Eyes ready?
Who was really the guiding force. And I request Dr. Ajit Deshpande to felicitate Dr. K.D. Mundara.
थोड़ा सा खाली घ्या खाली घ्या बुके खाली हा सर वरती हा इकडे सर तुमच्यात घेता सर इकडे सर वेट
किशोर बदे
नाही हा सर सर हाँ सर थोड़ा सा यस ओके ओके
and hard worker of IMA, President IMA Rata, by Dr. Ajit Deshpande. To come on the dais, and Vaijanti Bade Madam to come on the dais. Sarita Deshpande Madam and Vaijanti Bade Madam, come on the dais, please. And attending this conference for last 3 days, and Vaijanti Bade Madam, Professor HUD Department of Anesthesia for our Medical College Dori. So I request felicitation of Deshpande Madam, by Dr. K.D. Mundara, organizing chairman.
सर थोड़ा सा थोड़ा मारा
Then Dr. Steve, and who is working as a master of ceremony since yesterday. I think all the emotions come on the dais. Yeah, all the to declare the results for the paper presentation. I request Dr. Kishore Bade, first of all, felicitate all the participants by giving attendance certificate or participation certificate. Dr. Ajit Deshpande, please join us. Dr. K.D. Mandula, please join us. Dr. Rajendra Chaudhary. We encourage all our junior colleagues, MS and JDN, to get involved with the activities of IMA and for their academic developments. So,
Danish Patel, sir. Shushti Vatambar, Priyanka Saunke. Sir, थोड़ा सपोर्ट. Priyanka Saunke. Hitesh, Dr. Hitesh. Dr. Hitesh. Sir, समोर. Dr. Rahul. Dr. Mohammad Arif. Dr. Anup Shah. Dr. Palshala. Dr. Sai Lakshmi. Sir, समोर. Swapnil Mahajan. Dr. Hitesh. उसका फिरूंगा. Priyank Verma. Ranjit Patil. Rohit Patel. Ravi Shashank Sai. Ready, some more?
Thank you. Congratulations once again.
They have presented well under the guidance of their teacher, but still there is a scope for improvement. And as Dr. Bade has in his initial speech clearly said on which points we are selecting the numbers, according to that, the first number or first prize goes to Dr. Mahale, Dr. Mahak Balani. Congratulations, ma'am. Congratulations, Balani. Second prize goes to Srushti Modi.
As paper presentation and research work is very important for the postgraduate doctors, and that was the intention to get all our junior doctors enrolled in MasterCon. So before the result of the poster is ready, I request Dr. Kishore Bade to give some hints for these students regarding their paper presentation, so that they will be very well prepared next time. 2 minutes.
For all the budding doctors, research has come on the forefront. When we were students or when we were between post-graduation, there was not much in hope. But today, research is carrying a lot of importance. And secondly, for that, the NMC is taking all the efforts, and even our institutions, our various institutions are organizing various workshops for the students regarding the research methodology workshop. And every student has to go select the proper topic. Now in this case, I would say your selection of your topic is very important, where it should be seen that it is your original research work and how that research work is carried out within the ethical limitations or ethical guidance. Secondly, this research work should not be a plagiarism of copying someone's work and presenting it. That is also one of the drawbacks, or I would say black spots on the research that is going on. But there are the reasons why this is done, because in our country the facilities for the research are very limited, and so making for research, it is very important or paramount importance that the institutions should make various facilities available for the research. Secondly, there should be some incentives where the students can work. In foreign countries or European countries, the student get a benefit of incentives when he does some research work, because in our institution we have that exchange program where students from Sweden and Europe come for their own papers and research. Similarly, this thing should also be available in our country for the students, and there should be some originality and application. Any research just carried out for the sake of presenting a paper has little value. It should be useful for the patients, it should be useful for the guidelines, and it should establish some landmarks in the management. So with this, I say, I expect that this thing will improve in the future time, and more students will be encouraged to do research. Thank you.
Give some suggestions for the students
of India.
Government of India.
Accepted. Well, Dr. Bade has already told you about the research work, how it is to be done, and what efforts you are supposed to put in that. But considering the way in which the research work is done in India, I would like to suggest some points which our IMF President Dr. Putte will convey to Government of India. Now, the result of your treatment will not improve unless you know what are the lacunae in the treatment. And in India, we are afraid of telling what has gone wrong while treating the patient from us. We always try to hide the thing. If the mortality is there, there is always a tendency that change the papers, close it, don't show the real cause, because that will affect your career or Government of India will punish you. That type of approach from the government has made real disaster in real research work. There won't be improvement in the treatment unless you know what are the faults, what are the lacunae that are occurring during treatment. And you should learn from mistake of others rather than learning from your own mistakes, because it takes long time. And if the mistakes which are openly disclosed to the society without any fear, then that will improve the treatment. But for that, Government of India should give some immunity to the doctors. If it is done in good intention, there should not be any punishment, there should not be any inquiry. Then only this type of work will be presented fearlessly by everybody. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Achievement of this Mastercon conference is a very successful conference. And another achievement that we have got a president from our home. Dr. Ravindra Kute has become a president. I am a Maharashtra. Is like from our hometown, and I should congratulations from my bottom of heart. We have got a president like Ravindra Kute. He has got too much of energy for doing a social work like IMA, leaving our practices, leaving our scheduled duty. He is wandering from Bombay to Nagpur, Dhule to Kolhapur, and he has visited every IMA branch in Maharashtra state, and some 5-6 branches must be remaining, which he will visit, and he will guide to them shortly. And this Mastercon conference 17, 18, 19 and 20. Before starting Mastercon conference, we had a pre-conference workshop, parenting to the mentally retarded children at Shirdi, Mukhabadri Shala. That was a very good program. And at Rahata, we performed breast cancer awareness program. Dr. Sanjay Dudhat has guided. Both program pre-conference workshop were very good. And scientific program in this conference, all topics, all lectures were very good and innovative. And we can say this is a very successful Mastercon. And in the future, 1 year, Dr. Ravindra Kute will improve the Indian Medical Association quality of work, the problem of a doctor, and we are giving best luck and best wishes for his work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Veerbhadra, 2 minutes only.
Good evening to all the respected dignitaries present here and my team. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Ravindra Kute sir to giving us the opportunity to volunteer in such a great event. I would like to thank Dr. Indranil sir for keeping faith on me, and Dr. Mayuresh sir for guiding me at each and every steps. Last but not the least, this is the teamwork, and doing something is at such level, doing some conference is impossible without a team, and I thank every person of my team who have given a lot of support, kept a lot of faith on me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
First of all, great thanks to all the delegates, students, JDN members who have been participated in all the activities effortlessly. Special thanks to Veer Bhadra, Indranil, I don't know much names, Muskan, Ritu, everyone, Rajat, thanks, and it was a great success. Thank you.
I am Dr. Indranil Deshmukh. First of all, I want to congratulate all the winners of paper presentation as well as e-poster presentation, as well as all the participants. And my special thanks to my whole team of JDN Maharashtra. Here is Dr. Rajat Chandak, is General Secretary of JDN Maharashtra. Veer Bhadra Thakkar, Aishwarya Yadav is a National Council member, Mayuresh Kute, Muskan, and all the volunteers. There are two MOCs, they are raising their hands. Please give a huge round of applause for my team. Thank you.
And Aishwarya also come on the stage, 2 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to thank Ravindra Kute sir, who has first time involved as JDN and MSN student in this conference. And special thanks to all the volunteers. Muskan, she's asking me to take her name. Muskan and all the volunteers. You have made this event a successful one. So thank you so much.
Good evening everyone. I have really never experienced a conference like this where not just the IMA members but also the JDN members, the students, everybody is integrated and working together. I would really thank for this opportunity to Ravindra Kute sir, Mayuresh Kute sir and everyone who has made this possible. And moreover for all the scientific approaches and the lectures that we had which were really helpful for us choosing a brand. Also I would also like to thank all my members of the team, especially Muskan, who has helped us throughout the event. Thank you so much.
Anybody want to express?
Thank you everyone for giving me special. Thank you sir, it was really memorable. I didn't expect it that we will have so much fun, especially we were enjoying most of the time, but it was really fun. And thank you everyone, Laksh, Ritu, Pranshu, Jyoti, Arjun, Nitin, Vaibhav. Thank you everyone.
And on behalf of organizing committee.
Good evening everybody. First congratulations all the paper presentation and poster session students. It was nice time having all together for 4 days, and I am really thankful to Dr. Kute for appointing me as a treasurer and Dr. K.D. Mundala as chairperson of Mastacon 2022. So we have big academic teachers like Dr. Kishore Bade and Dr. Ajit Deshpande, and also Dr. Vajayati Bade and Dr. Sarita Deshpande here. And after declaring the results, I could see the joy, one part of it, and smiles. Oh yes, yes. So we congratulate Dr. Kute for his next coming year as President of Maharashtra IME. So thank you for that.
Dr. K.D. Mundala, few words regarding the Mastacon.
Dr. Ravindra Kute, IMA श्रीरामपूरचे सदस्य, अतिशय मेहनत कष्ट कम्युनिकेशन्स जेव्हापासून IMA मेंबर झाले तेव्हापासून या गोष्टी केल्यामुळे IMA स्टेट प्रेसिडेंट ही इतकी मोठी पोस्ट आणि मानाची पोस्ट श्रीरामपूरला मिळवून दिली आणि त्यांना मिळाली. याबद्दल आपला सर्वांतर्फे मी त्यांचं अभिनंदन करतो आणि पुढील त्यांच्या कारकिर्दीकरता ते नक्कीच त्यांची वाटचाल चांगलीच राहणार आहे. तर त्यांनी आता नॅशनल प्रेसिडेंटकरता प्रयत्न करावे त्या दृष्टिकोनातून त्यांनी पुढे जावं एवढी शुभेच्छा देतो. त्यांच्या सर्व टीमचे आभार मानतो, त्यांना शुभेच्छा देतो. थँक्यू व्हेरी मच. 3 cheers for Dr. Kute. 3 cheers for Dr. Kute. 3 cheers for Dr. Kute.
The results of e-poster presentation along with Dr. Vaijayanti Bade madam.
Yes, students, you were good in all of your posters were quite good and quite innovative. But when we have an exam, we have to declare some result. So I would like to declare the result as
Srushti is the first one. That is Department of Ophthalmology. Actually, she presented it for the paper, but being the only single case, it has been selected for the posters, and it is best out of all. Second,
So felicitation of Srushti. Congratulations.
मॅडम समोर मॅडम सर या समोर.
and for this I think Dr. Bade should be congratulated. He has guided us.
Under his guidance.
Under his guidance. And the second prize.
Shrushti will talk afterwards.
Regarding that. And the second prize is divided amongst Hitesh Muradia and Nivesh Patel.
congratulations and keep it up.
And all the participants of e-poster come forward.
Please, all the participants come on the stage. Everybody, I think there are 7, because the judges have declared this, though she presented as a paper, being a single case, it was selected for the poster presentation, and that's why we examined or judged as a poster, and so she got the prize. She can explain what are her feelings in the case.
Thank you, ma'am. This is a case on severe dry eye, in which we done the salivary gland transplant. It is done by Dr. Kishore Bade sir, Professor and HOD of Department of Ophthalmology. Thank you, sir.
One group photograph, please.
Thank you.
Presentation of Mastercon, a grand success. Thank you very much, and we will conclude here. And definitely next year, that is 2022-23, we will be all together. We have to work for IMA, we have to work for MSN, we have to work for JDN. And I am proud to say that MSN and JDN in Maharashtra is leading, and it is #1 at national level. So best wishes, MSN and JDN.
So recitation remaining here is of Dr. Kute.
डॉक्टर कुटे आपल्या महाराष्ट्राचे IMAचे अध्यक्ष झालेले आहेत, तरी आपण सर्व मिळून त्यांचा सत्कार करूया. सर
ओके
Shirdi declaration also. Yeah. And few words to
Okay, ready? परत एकदा थँक्यू
Ullas Patil Medical College today. Thank you, hotel management.